Okay, ready to dive in? We're tackling Jorge Majfud today.
Ah, Majfud. Always good for a provocative deep dive.
Yeah, he really doesn't hold back. This time he's got a whole stack of writings about U.S. power.
And how historical narratives and the media play a role.
You got it. From Trump's rhetoric to, like, the Mexican-American War, even the Panama Canal.
He's connecting some dots across, well, centuries, really.
Exactly. It's about what he calls Anglo-Saxon fanaticism and its impact on U.S. hegemony. You ready to unpack all that?
Let's do it.
All right, so where do we even begin with this? Majfud uses Trump, like his actual words, as a jumping-off point.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Like, remember when Trump was all about that wall on the U.S.-Mexico border?
Oh yeah, build the wall, and Mexico will pay for it.
Exactly. Majfud sees that and hears echoes of 19th century manifest destiny.
That idea that the U.S. just inherently has the right to expand its power no matter what.
Exactly. Like, it's their destiny. Right. And it's not just about Mexico. Look at all the stuff Trump said about China.
Stealing our jobs, all that.
Right. Majfud argues that these pronouncements, they're not new. They're part of this larger historical pattern.
So it's like Trump's just pulling from the same playbook that's been used for centuries to justify U.S. expansionism.
Basically, yeah.
Majfud even pulls out quotes from, like, Andrew Jackson, to make his point.
Oh, yeah. About, like, how Native Americans were the aggressors.
Yeah, justifying the forced removal of Native Americans by claiming they were the ones starting trouble. It's like, whoa, history repeating itself.
Totally. And that narrative, that us versus them story, the U.S. is the good guy defending itself.
It's been used over and over to justify expansion and intervention.
For sure. Majfud's argument is that the justifications may change over time, but the underlying goal stays the same.
Which is?
Maintaining U.S. dominance, keeping that top spot on the world stage, no matter what.
Okay, that's a pretty bleak view, but it's hard to argue with some of those historical examples. But where does the media come in? Because Majfud is super critical of outlets like, the New York Times and CNN.
Right. He sees them as part of the problem, actually.
Right.
Yeah, like they're helping to maintain this dominant narrative that supports U.S. hegemony.
So, like, perpetuating the problem.
Exactly. He uses this example, this New York Times article that questioned the motives of historians.
Historians who are doing what?
Who condemned the destruction of schools in Gaza by Israeli forces.
Oh, right.
It was called scholasticide, which is such a powerful word. But the Times kind of downplayed it,
Oh, so Majfud sees that as the Times siding with power over truth.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a pretty bold claim to say those media outlets are actively shaping narratives to benefit the powerful.
He goes deep, though. Like, he backs it up with a ton of historical examples. The Mexican-American War is a big one.
Okay, remind me, how does that fit in?
He talks about journalists like John O'Sullivan. He coined the term manifest destiny, right? And then there's William Randolph Hearst, who is notorious for, exaggerating stories, sensationalizing them to sell papers.
And Hearst helped fuel public support for the war.
Oh, absolutely.
It's wild how Majfud connects all these things. Trump's rhetoric, 19th century expansionism, and the media's role. He's saying there's a pattern, almost a blueprint, for how the U.S. keeps its power.
He is, and it continues to today. Like, remember how CNN framed a lot of Trump's expansionist ideas?
As national security concerns, yeah, I remember.
Majfud calls that media hypocrisy.
Right.
They're ignoring, like, the entire history of U.S. interventionism.
Especially in Latin America.
Oh, yeah. He goes into that a lot in his book, La Frontera, salvaje.
So wait, is he saying if we want, like, objective truth about U.S. foreign policy, we shouldn't look to the mainstream media?
That's the argument he's making, yeah.
Yikes.
He calls those outlets hegemonic media, and he thinks they're way too embedded in the power structure.
They're reinforcing the status quo instead of challenging it.
Exactly. He even compares their power to a spider web, trapping dissenting voices, like in his book, Moscas and la telaraña.
So, if the media is shaping the narrative and we can't trust them, how do we break free from that influence? Like, how do we even begin to think critically about all of this?
That's the big question, right? Majfud says we have to be skeptical. We can't just accept the easy narratives, the ones that make us feel good about ourselves and our country.
So what we need to, like, dig deeper.
Yeah. Look at history. Look for alternative sources of information.
And be willing to challenge the conventional wisdom even when it makes us uncomfortable.
Exactly. He says true understanding means facing those uncomfortable truths.
Okay, I'm with you so far, but this is getting pretty heavy. And there's another layer to all of this, right? This idea that the systems of exploitation that built U.S. power in the past are still around today.
Absolutely.
It's about slavery and its legacy.
Right, right. He's saying that the system of exploitation just shifted after the Civil War.
So, like, it didn't actually go away.
It adapted. He argues that corporations basically replaced slave owners.
Whoa. Hold on. He's saying corporations are the new slave owners. That's a bold statement.
Yeah, he gets specific, even names companies like J.P. Morgan, Wells Fargo, Aetna. He's saying they're perpetuating economic inequality and exploitation.
Okay, so how does he support that? I mean, that's a huge claim to make.
He looks at the post-Civil War era, how a lot of formerly enslaved people were forced into sharecropping, or low-wage jobs with almost no rights.
Creating this system of economic dependency that benefited who?
The corporations. They were the ones profiting, and it reinforced those power imbalances that were already there. Majfud argues this legacy of exploitation is still shaping the U.S. economy.
And its influence around the world.
Definitely.
Okay, this is painting a pretty bleak picture of U.S. power and how it got here. But does Majfud offer any solutions? Or is it just all bad news?
Well, he does see a path forward, but it's not easy. He's a big believer in critical thinking, resisting that pull of blind patriotism.
Not just blindly accepting what we're told, especially from those in power.
Right. He says we have to be willing to challenge the status quo.
Even when it's uncomfortable or goes against what everyone else seems to believe.
Exactly. He says that's how real progress happens.
By questioning those in authority and being willing to stand up for what we believe is right.
Yeah, he uses examples from history, like Smedley Butler, a general who spoke out against U.S. military interventionism, and Eugene Debs, a socialist leader who opposed World War I.
People who were willing to go against the grain, even when it cost them personally.
Yeah, he sees those figures as examples of real courage.
Wow, this is a lot to think about.
Yeah.
Majfud definitely doesn't pull any punches, does he? He's making us confront some really hard truths about U.S. power, history, and the role we all play in it.
Yeah, it's dense stuff, but it's also super relevant to what's going on in the world today.
We've barely scratched the surface, though.
Oh, there's so much more to unpack.
Well, good thing this is a deep dive. We'll keep going in the next episode.
It's really interesting how Majfud contrasts, like, the official historical narratives, the ones we usually hear, with what people were actually experiencing at the time. He uses the Mexican-American War a lot for this. A lot of Americans might think of it as, the U.S. just expanding its territory, but Majfud highlights all these dissenters, even back then.
Oh, wow. Like who?
Well, he brings up Ulysses S. Grant, who obviously went on to be president, but Grant actually admitted in his memoirs that he thought the war was unjustified.
Huh. Interesting.
Right. And then there's Ethan Allen Hitchcock. He was a general who kept these really detailed diaries, and he expressed a lot of moral concerns about the invasion.
So even within the military, there were doubts about the war.
Oh, yeah, definitely. These firsthand accounts really challenge the narrative of, the U.S. fighting a righteous war. They expose the greed, the desire for expansion, all of that.
And it wasn't just military figures who were skeptical, right? Because I remember Majfud also mentions Abraham Lincoln.
Absolutely. Lincoln, who was a congressman at the time, denounced the war. He called it a wicked war and said it was based on fake pretenses.
Wow, a wicked war.
Yeah.
That's pretty strong language, especially coming from someone who, later became such a revered figure in American history.
Right. It shows how powerful dissenting voices can be, even if they're not the ones that get, amplified in the history books. And Majfud connects this back to the media, how the penny press was becoming really popular at the time, and they fueled a lot of the public support for the war with, sensationalized stories.
Fake news, basically.
Basically, yeah. It's been a tactic for a long time, manipulating public opinion through the media. He uses the example of the USS Maine, the ship that sank in Havana Harbor.
Oh, yeah. Remember the Maine?
Exactly. Newspapers like William Randolph Hearst's New York Journal instantly blamed Spain, even though there wasn't really any evidence.
Classic yellow journalism.
Totally. And that frenzy, that media frenzy, it whipped up public opinion so much that war with Spain became pretty much inevitable.
All because of a story that was, at best, questionable, and at worst, totally made up. It makes you think about how easily public opinion can be swayed, especially when it comes to things like war.
Right. Majfud's point is we can't just accept everything we're told, especially from people or institutions that, have a reason to maintain the status quo. We have to think critically, question the official narratives, and look for information from other sources.
He's saying blind patriotism can be dangerous, right?
Yeah.
That real love for your country sometimes means speaking truth to power, even if it means questioning those in authority.
Exactly. That can be hard, especially when dissent is often seen as being disloyal or unpatriotic. But he's saying it's so important.
So Okay, we're accepting Majfud's premise that the U.S. is an empire in decline. How does that change how we view what's going on in the world today? Does he give us like a roadmap for how to navigate things?
Well, he argues that empires, when they're declining, they often become more repressive, more desperate to hold on to power.
So more controlling.
Yeah, he points to things like the Patriot Act, the expansion of surveillance programs as evidence of this. He's saying those measures are more about controlling people than actually protecting them.
Interesting. So we should be wary of giving up our civil liberties in the name of security.
Definitely. And be skeptical of those narratives that, portray anyone who disagrees as an enemy of the state.
Like if you're not with us, you're against us kind of thing.
Exactly. He also talks about the dangers of militarism, how declining empires often use military force as a distraction.
A distraction from what?
Well, from problems at home or just to project an image of strength, even if it's not really there.
That definitely feels relevant today with, all the conflicts and interventions we see happening around the world.
Right. Majfud is making us think about the motives behind those actions, the long-term consequences of relying on military force all the time.
So is he saying we should just become isolationist?
No, not really. He's advocating for a smarter, more nuanced approach to foreign policy.
Okay, so not isolationism, but thinking more carefully about how we engage with the world.
Yeah, and using diplomacy, cooperation, mutual respect, all that.
Building bridges, not walls.
Exactly. He says true leadership isn't about dominating others. It's about finding common ground and working together to solve problems.
Okay, that's a little more hopeful. He's saying there's a better way, a way to break free from the cycle of violence and exploitation.
He is, and he thinks true leadership involves rejecting the whole winner-takes-all mentality of empires. It's about creating a world where everyone can thrive.
That's a pretty radical idea, though, considering how competitive our world is.
It is, but Majfud thinks it's absolutely necessary if we want a world that's sustainable and just. He talks a lot about how interconnected everything is.
So our actions have consequences that reach far beyond ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just about changing foreign policy. It's about changing how we think and interact with the world on a fundamental level. He's calling for a shift in consciousness, away from fear and greed towards compassion and justice.
That's a pretty big ask, especially considering how ingrained those things are in our culture.
It is a big ask, but Majfud thinks it's possible. And he sees signs of this shift already happening.
Oh, like what?
Well, things like the growing awareness of climate change, the push for social and economic justice, those kinds of things.
So there is reason to be hopeful, even though things seem pretty bleak right now.
Absolutely. Majfud thinks we're at a turning point, and we have a chance to create a fundamentally better world, one that's more just, more sustainable, more humane. But it's up to us to make it happen. One thing that really stuck with me is how Majfud talks about censorship. Like, it's not always this blatant thing, right?
Right. It's not always like book burning and outright ban.
Exactly. He points out how throughout history, people in power, they've used labels to silence their critics, calling them like radicals, extremists, even traitors.
So it's a way to discredit people without actually having to, address their arguments.
Exactly. And Majfud says we have to be aware of that tactic. Don't just accept those labels at face value. Actually look at what people are saying, the substance of their arguments.
It's like he's saying, think for yourself.
Totally. He's saying a healthy democracy needs open debate. We have to be willing to hear different perspectives, even if we don't agree with them.
It's about protecting everyone's right to speak their mind, right?
Yeah.
Even if we think they're wrong.
Exactly. It's about creating a space where everyone feels safe to share their ideas, even if they're controversial.
That's really important, especially these days, with so much polarization and people retreating into their own echo chambers.
Oh, absolutely. It's so easy to just surround yourself with people who already agree with you. But Majfud's saying that's not real critical thinking.
We need to be exposed to a variety of viewpoints, even ones that challenge our own beliefs.
Right. It's about being open to the possibility that you might be wrong, that there might be another way of looking at things.
That's tough, though, especially when you feel really strongly about something.
It is tough, but it's how we grow and learn, right? It's how we get closer to the truth.
Okay, so Majfud's saying we need to be more discerning about the information we consume. We can't just passively absorb everything we see and hear.
Yeah, he's basically saying don't outsource your critical thinking. You can't rely on algorithms or other people to tell you what to think.
So be skeptical of everything, even stuff that seems to confirm our own biases.
Exactly. Develop that healthy skepticism. Question everything. Don't be afraid to dig deeper and look for the truth.
And remember, The truth is often messy and complicated. There's rarely a simple answer.
Totally. And this all ties back into his point about blind patriotism, remember? True patriotism isn't about blindly accepting everything your country does.
It's about holding your leaders accountable, calling out injustice, and trying to make your country a better place.
Yeah, it's about speaking truth to power, even when it's hard. Which is what Majfud keeps coming back to, right? That the U.S., its power, it's often been built on some pretty dark stuff.
Exploitation, domination. And he says those patterns are still playing out today.
He's asking us to look at the U.S., really look at it, and ask, are we living up to our ideals?
Freedom, democracy, justice, all of that. Or have we become the very thing we claim to oppose?
It's a tough question to face, but Majfud thinks it's crucial if we actually want to create a better future.
He's not letting us off the hook. He's pushing us to think critically about our role in all of this.
And he's not just criticizing, he's also offering a way forward, a different way of being in the world. It starts with recognizing how interconnected everything is. Our choices affect other people, other countries, even the planet itself.
So it's about more than just changing our foreign policy. It's about changing how we live our lives, how we treat each other, how we interact with the world around us.
He's reminding us that we have the power to create the future we want. It's not predetermined. We're not just along for the ride. And to do that, we need to think critically, be courageous, and fight for justice.
Those are powerful ideas, but also kind of overwhelming. It's easy to feel helpless when you think about all the problems in the world.
I get that. But Majfud is saying, don't give up. Even small actions, small acts of kindness and compassion, they can make a difference.
It's about finding your own way to contribute, using your unique skills and passions to make the world a little bit better.
Exactly. And he believes every little bit helps. Every act of kindness, every effort to create positive change, it all adds up.
This has been a really intense conversation, but also incredibly inspiring.
Majfud's work is definitely challenging, but it also gives me hope. He's reminding us that we have the power to shape the future, and that's a powerful thing.
I think that's a good place to leave it for today.
Yeah, it's a lot to digest.
But these are conversations we need to keep having. So to everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep those questions in mind, keep learning, and keep pushing for a better world.